This is a Commitment 2020 special in partnership with the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, the Granite State Debates.
Lockdown, remote learning, social distancing. Some of these words weren't even in our vocabulary when 2020 began, and now they're some of the most pressing issues facing the person in the state's corner office. A pandemic arrived, then a surge of new movements for equality and police reform, and an emotional debate over racism in New Hampshire. These new priorities will have an outsized impact on the usual concerns in the race for governor, from the economy and taxes to education and the opioid crisis. We're joined tonight by two Democrats who agree that progressive change is needed, but have some different ideas on what it should look like.
I don't support a broad-based income or sales tax, and I would veto one if it reached my desk.
I will not balance the state's budget on the back of property taxpayers.
It's one thing to talk about the issues, it's another thing to actually have done it.
I am not on both sides of every issue.
Now, the candidates make their case in their own words in our Granite State debate.
Tonight, the Democratic candidates for governor.
Hello, and welcome to our Granite State Debates, a week-long series ahead of next week's state primary election. I'm Jennifer Vaughn. In a year where the governor's judgment has directly affected everyone's daily life, an executive counselor and a state senator are vying for the chance to replace incumbent Republican Chris Sununu. Democrat Andrew Volinsky led a fight to restructure school funding in 1997, work that the attorney continues now as an executive counselor for the 2nd District. State Senate Majority Leader Dan Feltus is also an attorney. Health care and bail reform have been two of his key issues in the State House. WMUR News 9 evaluated all legally qualified candidates and selected those considered most newsworthy according to its objective criteria to participate in this debate. And we have a lot of questions for the candidates tonight. They'll have 1 minute to answer with 30-second rebuttals allowed at the moderator's discretion. Those questions will come from me and our two panelists, WMUR anchor Monica Hernandez and WMUR political reporter John DeStaso. This setup tonight is a little different than usual. This is being recorded instead of broadcast live. We're keeping a safe distance here in the studio, and the candidates are not here in the room with us. Senator Feltus and Councilor Volinsky are joining us remotely from separate rooms at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College. And to begin tonight, we've asked each candidate to tell us how they would make New Hampshire a better place. Senator Feltus, let's begin with you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, WMUR and Andrew, and everybody watching at home. We need to get out of this mess in a way that actually works for working people and working families, not just those at the top. My dad worked in a furniture factory for 45 years. My mom did the night shift. And right out of law school, I had a choice: work as a corporate attorney or work in the public interest. I worked as a legal aid attorney, representing low to middle income families, including during the last economic crisis, the Great Recession, and in the state Senate delivered for them. Andrew made a different choice. For decades, worked as a corporate attorney. Fundamentally, this selection is about which side are you on. I've always been on the side of working people and working families, and will do the same as governor.
Thank you. Councilor Volinsky.
New Hampshire is a wonderful place. That's why Amy and I chose to move here almost 40 years ago so I could be a public defender. We were in the South where I defended death penalty cases and taught law school. 8 years later, I became the Claremont school funding lawyer, where I defended the interests of New Hampshire's most vulnerable, its children, its seniors, its small business owners, against the crushing weight of the immoral and unfair property tax, New Hampshire's most broad-based tax. Now is the time for bold ideas and courageous leadership. I hope to offer that to our state as governor.
Thank you both. Let's now get to the most pressing topic on many people's minds right now, the COVID-19 pandemic. And John DeStaso has your first question.
Thank you, Jen, and good evening, gentlemen. Looking around the country at how other states are doing with COVID-19 infections and the trends of new cases, deaths, and hospitalizations, New Hampshire has continued to hold steady with a relatively small percent positive. And polling does show that Granite Staters overwhelmingly support how Governor Sununu has responded to this pandemic. What can you do better? And this is Councilor Volinsky first.
Well, let's go back to those most vulnerable groups: children, seniors, and small business people. The governor abdicated leadership on school reopening. He made a complete hash out of it by he and Edelblue listening to Betsy DeVos and providing no leadership. Seniors, we have some of the worst death rates in our nursing homes of any state in the nation. That's a problem. We should have paid more attention to that early. I would have spent time with air systems, with supporting staff in nursing homes, small businesses. The governor thinks that a $20 million business is a small business. I would have spent more time with $500 to $1 million businesses in annual revenues and devoted more money and resources there to mom and pop businesses.
Thank you. Senator Feltes?
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. I agree with much of what Andrew just said, and with 5 or 6 weeks to go before school started, everybody waiting on Governor Sununu to come up with a school reopening plan with public health standards and clear guidance and financial support for our schools. He did anything but and punted it down to the local level, just like Donald Trump punted it down to the state level. It's no wonder Chris Sununu calls himself, in his own words, a Trump guy through and through. Those are Chris Sununu's own words. You should believe them. And all his actions and conduct recently show it. And it's not enough to criticize the absence of a school reopening plan. We put forward our own plan, Live Free and Learn Safe. You can take a look at it on our website. I'm the only candidate for governor with a school reopening plan, including the current governor. And we got to get out of this mess in a way that works for working people and working families. That means finally moving forward with paid family and medical leave insurance, housing protections, so many of the things that Chris Sununu vetoed.
Okay, thank you. Monica has our next question.
Now, you have both called for a mask mandate in New Hampshire. How would you enforce such a mandate? Which agency would be responsible for that enforcement? And what type of punitive measures would be included? Councilor Walensky, we'll start with you.
Look, Trump and Sununu have questioned the public health data on whether masks make a difference. It's clear that they do. I would have preferred and confronted Sununu about this in early April and asked him to put together a mask mandate. I would show leadership, and leadership by example is often what we need to encourage people to wear masks and be safe. I would ask businesses to refrain from serving customers who refuse to wear masks. If you're in a public indoor space, you should be wearing a mask because it's good for your community. It protects your neighbor. We should be able to make that argument and, without relying harshly on punitive measures, move people to do the right thing by modeling the kind of behavior that we would expect of our neighbors and our friends.
Senator.
Thank you. I do support a common sense public mask requirement. We're the only state in New England that doesn't have it under Governor Chris Sununu. It's common sense. It's based on the advice of public health experts. And we have to rely on the advice of public health experts in a crisis, in a pandemic. And it's one thing if you're out walking your dog by yourself, but it's another thing if you're in public in a place of public accommodation. Out of respect for others, including our frontline workers in grocery stores and healthcare settings, people should wear masks. It makes good sense. And we need to move forward with common sense public health measures. And look, we've seen what's happened recently, including Chris Sununu rolling out the red carpet for Donald Trump in a rock concert style setting of a rally. That's not public health. That's elevating politics above public health. It's prioritizing Chris Sununu's relationship with Donald Trump over public health at a fragile time in this recovery.
But Senator, 30 seconds if you can. How do you differ from your opponent on this matter?
From Andrew? Is that the question, Jennifer?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think Andrew and I agree on this. I think what we also agree on is that Chris Sununu shouldn't be rolling out the red carpet for a rock concert style atmosphere. Thousands of people jammed together. Look, it shouldn't be just a rally, a political rally. It should be, rock concerts and other type of forums where thousands of people are jammed together. That doesn't make good sense. That's elevating politics above public health.
Councilor, what
Can
about
I say
you?
That
Councilor, what about you? Any differences here between you and your opponent here on Senator Feltes?
Look, Sununu and Trump should not be treating New Hampshire as a photo op. They are dangerous when it comes to spreading the virus. We should have not allowed the president to come and hold that rally today. I was the one who opposed the Pease rally when that was being planned. That is a difference between the two of us. No photo ops for New Hampshire by this president and spreading the virus.
Okay, let's talk about New Hampshire schools. John has the next question.
Thanks, Jen. Schools are getting back to classes and sports are starting across the state with COVID-19 restrictions. Governor Sununu has given each district discretion to devise their own plans. And first to Senator Feltes, if you were governor, would you get directly involved in how schools schedule classes and what happens inside the buildings? And would you implement specific requirements for students, teachers, and staff beyond the current health guidelines?
Well, thank you, John. And we've laid out exactly what we would do as governor in a plan called Live Free and Learn Safe. It's on our website. It lays out public health standards and guidance. It's based on conversations with public health officials, including former commissioner of HHS, Ned Helms. And it lays out what happens when a kid gets sick, what happens in cafeterias and busing, concrete specific guidance. It doesn't control everything, but this isn't fundamentally a question of local control versus not. It's a question of whether or not to do your job, and Governor Sununu did not do his job on schools. He issued no clear public health standards, no guidance, and no additional financial support. And what we need to do and what we laid out in our plan is make sure that we treat educators with respect. Medical grade N95 masks for educators. The average teacher spends over $400 out of pocket to do their own job. They shouldn't spend any more out of pocket to be safe when they teach.
Counselor?
In a joint op-ed with Amanda Russell, the chair of the Dover School Board, I laid out a 10-point plan on how we could reopen schools. More importantly, back in the spring, I asked Sununu and Edelblue, as commissioner, to do a short summer program so we can test how to reopen safely, and they refused to do that. Look, we need to lower density in the schools. We need to make sure that air handling systems actually work. Keene just found out that their preschool building is without a workable ventilation system. I also heard from teachers today that even though school districts have agreed to provide them with PPE, the school districts can't find it. That's a failure of Sununu and Edelblue. They shouldn't have listened to Betsy DeVos. They should have listened to the New Hampshire Task Force and stepped up and done the right thing.
Thank you. Monica has our next question.
In a recent interview with ABC News, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden said he would, quote, do whatever it takes to combat the spread of coronavirus in the U.S., including locking it down if necessary, saying, quote, I would shut it down. I would listen to the scientists. If New Hampshire is in a similar situation as it is now with low hospitalization and case numbers, and the president locked the country down, would you defy his orders and keep New Hampshire open? Councilor Walensky.
You know, it's such a loaded question designed not to lead us anywhere. Look, we are in a public health crisis. We need to listen to the public health scientists. If the president, based on their specific advice, concludes that the nation as a whole needs to act as one community to lock down the COVID-19 pandemic, of course I would cooperate with that, because protecting my neighbors, our communities, the citizens of this state is what we need to do, particularly the most vulnerable, the children, the seniors in our state who often can't fend for themselves. We need to cooperate. New Hampshire is the only state that doesn't cooperate in the sharing of PPE equipment, and in reopening, I would reverse that and work with our neighbors.
Senator Feltes?
Well, thank you. Well, first, I look forward to voting for Vice President Joe Biden to be the next president of the United States. And I think him listening to scientists is exactly what we need to do right now. And the public health experts and the scientists say we need a common sense public mask requirement. Sununu hasn't done it. The public health experts and the scientists say we need public health standards for our schools. Governor Sununu hasn't done it. And we need PPE for small businesses. Governor Sununu vetoed it. And we need to make sure we look out for our workers and our families and COVID-19, including paid family and medical leave insurance, something I've led on. Governor Sununu vetoed it. on issue after issue that affects our economy and working families. And let's disabuse ourselves with this notion that public health and our economy are somehow different. They're not mutually exclusive. They're mutually intertwined. And we advance worker safety, we advance our economy. On worker safety and on public health, Chris Sununu has vetoed everything, including bipartisan legislation we've sent his way.
Thank you. We get back to John with the next question.
Thank you. The economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic are still kind of being figured out. They're not fully realized yet. But we do know that the state at this point faces a more than $300 million budget deficit. Have you, first to Senator Feltus, identified cuts you would definitely make, or how would you otherwise close that gap as governor?
Well, thank you, John. Governor Sununu can close the gap right now. The $143 million gap in this fiscal year could be closed with CARES Act money that's in the state treasury right now. He refuses to do it. In fact, he's going out to a consultant using CARES Act money to pay a consultant to identify cuts so he can, I guess, hide behind the recommendations of the consultant instead of using the CARES Act money to fill the gap right now and look out for addiction treatment services and homelessness services, things that Governor Sununu have unilaterally cut recently. And we're only getting worse under COVID-19. And what I say at stake is looking out for ordinary folks, working families and working people. That's what this is about. Making sure that this budget takes care of ordinary people and looking out for ordinary people, not pushing more tax breaks for big corporations, but looking out for property taxpayers, for addiction treatment services, and for our families.
Thank you. Councilor Volinsky?
Look, let's start with what I would not do. Coming out of the 2008 recession, Speaker O'Brien doubled down on the property tax. He shifted every state responsibility he could to the local property taxpayer and scooped up local property revenues at the same time. Sununu's doubled down on that plan already. Under his administration, local property taxes have gone up by more than $320 million, more than under any other governor. I don't know why Chris Sununu and Dan both support this property tax system. We need to develop revenue sources that will allow the state to meet its responsibilities. In terms of COVID-19, we will need federal relief money. We can use what's there to bail out schools and businesses, but we'll have to press McConnell to release new CARES Act funding so that we can move forward and protect our local property taxpayers.
Okay, thank you. Back to John with the next question.
Thank you. You've both criticized Governor Sununu for not taking action to stop President Trump from holding a rally in New Hampshire, but you both either supported or actually marched in Black Lives Matter demonstrations. Those and political rallies are forms of free speech. Why should one type of expression be allowed, but another should not? Counselor?
It's the conduct. It's a question of public health. It's not the message. So you look at the photos from the Trump rally and from the RNC convention, you'll see an occasional mask. I walked with Black Lives Matters in Concord and Manchester. Everyone was wearing a mask. Everyone was staying socially distant, and those who came without masks were supplied masks. Look, you need to trust the public health data here. Masks make a difference, and if you want to enjoy the privileges of free speech, you need to do it consistent with meeting public health concerns. And that's why I was pleased to participate with Black Lives Matters, to involve them in discussions of how I would govern if I'm elected. But we do it in safe ways, either by teleconference or with masks on when we're in person.
Senator, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Look, Governor Sununu has called President Trump's rallies, in his own words, a rock concert style venue. And would you have rock concerts right now with thousands of people jammed in like sardines? That's not good for public health. And it doesn't matter what political party the politician is. It doesn't matter about that. What matters is public health. And Governor Sununu even said himself he wouldn't go into the crowd. He wouldn't attend it for his own health and safety. Well, if it's not safe for Governor Sununu, it's not safe for Granite Staters. We need to look out for public safety and put that first, put the politics aside. And all too often, Chris Sununu is elevating his relationship with Trump over public health. He even calls himself, in his own words, a Trump guy through and through. We got to do better than this. We got to look out for our communities. We got to look out for our nursing homes and our workers.
Okay, thank you both. Let's get back to Monica now with the next question.
You know, COVID has touched everyone in one way or another. Tell us about a personal experience that you've had with COVID-19 and how it's affected your life. Let's start with Senator Feltes.
Sure. For a good chunk of the pandemic, Iris and Josie, our two young daughters, were out of daycare, and Aaron and I did the best we could, just like every other family, to juggle. Fortunately, our daycare has opened up, but for over 20,000 parents, daycare hasn't even opened up. And when it opened up, Monica, on the first or second week, Iris had a runny nose, and per the protocol, both Iris and Josie were sent home. And for a week plus, and we struggled to figure out what could we do to get them back into daycare. Struggled with the absence of, the rapid testing in the state. And this is an issue that affects so many families, and it affects our workforce. And so, look, I can tell you, this is crushing working families right now. And that's what I mean. We got to look out for working people and working families in this mess.
Senator, thank you. Councilor Walensky, what about you?
Well, Amy and I have been fortunate during the pandemic. We have a new grandson who's now 14 weeks old. I have never held him. He lives in Denver with our son's family. Amy, my wife, and our daughter Molly, about 5-6 weeks ago, rented a van and drove to Denver and slept in the van a couple nights so that they could meet and hold our grandson. I missed that. But more importantly, our friend Janice lost her husband in a nursing home. She couldn't be with him during his final hours. That's crushing. We have heard those stories over and over again. The small inconvenience, the small difficulties that Amy and I have suffered pale in comparison to those who have not been with their loved ones when they passed away.
Very personal perspective on the virus. Our thanks to you both for sharing that. And now, in the spirit of making sure that we cover a number of topics tonight, we're going to hit several of them now in a lightning round. So please answer in 30 seconds or less. Okay, so the first one regarding judicial nominees. Should working on or for a political campaign disqualify a lawyer from serving on the bench here in New Hampshire? Councilor Walensky first, please.
Should not disqualify the lawyer, but it's appropriate to ask what the platforms were. That's the problem with Gordon MacDonald's nomination. He twice worked for political parties that denied the right to reproductive freedom, and that's disqualifying.
Senator.
Well, Andrew lifts up his blocking of Gordon MacDonald as the alleged third anti-choice justice on the New Hampshire Supreme Court, 5-member court. Well, if that's the case, I guess the question for Andrew is, why did he vote for the first two?
I'm happy to answer to that if I'm permitted.
Please,
please. They didn't have documented records of antagonism towards reproductive rights. And if you were so concerned about the first two, why didn't you say something during either of their nomination processes?
Senator, respond to that, please, and then we'll move on.
Well, because I'm not on the executive council, and I think the questions need to come from Andrew on the executive council, and he voted for the first two. So I don't think we've heard an explanation about why he voted for them.
I thought they were qualified, and I don't disqualify candidates just because they're Republicans. I look at their documented record, and there was no documented record of antagonism towards reproductive rights, as there was with Gordon MacDonald. And if you think I missed something, you had the responsibility to point it out in time rather than to take shots during a debate.
Senator, please respond.
Well, look, I think it's clear. Andrew has campaigned on his blocking of Gordon MacDonald as the alleged third anti-choice justice of a 5-member court. And the first two he voted for. So he's basing much of his campaign on this. So I don't think he's answered the question about why he voted for the first two.
The first two were not anti-choice.
Okay.
Actually, the first one was a woman who supports reproductive rights. And I have not said Gordon was the third.
Okay.
I said he was the Chief Justice.
Gentlemen, thank you. We're going to move on now to the next question in our lightning round. Senator Feltes, let's direct this one to you first. Is it offensive to celebrate Columbus Day as a state holiday?
Look, on holidays, I think we ought to make Election Day a holiday and do away with Columbus Day. That's my view.
Counselor?
We should recognize our history and celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day.
Okay, Counselor, staying with you for the next one. Would you go to a socially distanced sporting event?
A professional event?
Any sporting
Is that
event?
what you're asking?
Socially distanced, would you go?
Yeah, I would hesitate. I think this is the wrong time to do that. It sets a bad example, particularly for someone like Dan and I, who are in leadership and running for office. We need to be careful about the example we set. My kids were all high school athletes. I was very proud to attend as many games as I possibly could. But I think in these times, it's more important for me to set the right example.
Senator?
I would agree with Andrew.
Okay, Senator, staying with you. What's your favorite activity to do here in New Hampshire?
Favorite activity, other than being in my backyard with my family, Erin and two girls, Iris and Josie, is hiking.
Counselor?
Well, Amy and I have each hiked all 48 of New Hampshire's 4,000 footers. So Dan and I agree on that point, and I've hiked about 15 of them in winter. I really like the outdoors. It's one of the things that attracted me to New Hampshire in the first place almost 40 years ago.
Counselor, have you dined indoors at a restaurant in New Hampshire during the pandemic?
I have not. I've done takeout to support friends and local businesses, but I have not dined indoors.
Senator?
I have not dined indoors. I've been indoors at different restaurants and businesses, talking with business owners and restaurant owners. Dined outdoors and also, like Andrew, done some takeout.
Okay, let's move on from the lightning round. Thank you both. We've already dedicated a significant amount of time to the coronavirus, but we also asked our Facebook fans what they thought were some of the other big issues to be addressed. Several people, including Margaret Barney, said social injustice. So let's turn to that topic now, and here's Monica.
Does New Hampshire need to work to become a more accepting place for people of all races, sexual orientations, religions, and sexes? And as governor, would you actively work to get more people of color involved in all levels of state and local government? Senator Feltes, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you for the question. The answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, we can always do better. And, the current governor has said systemic racism doesn't exist. That's what Chris Sununu says. It does exist. And the first step in combating it is saying it exists and working from there. And we have worked and put forward plans both in this campaign, but also as a legal aid lawyer. I worked as the Housing Justice Project Director for New Hampshire Legal Assistance, combating housing discrimination all across New Hampshire. Did that work in the trenches, fighting for ordinary folks, facing discrimination, facing impediments to inclusion. In the state Senate, continue that work, passing a number of pieces of legislation to include more people in our democracy and economy. And as governor, I would form the Office of Racial Equity within the governor's office to work to identify systemic practices and include more people of color in state government.
Thank you. Councilor Volinsky.
Let me start here. Black Lives Matter. I would invite anyone to look at our respective campaign staffs. You will find that mine is the only diverse, woman-led staff of the three candidates, Chris Sununu, Dan Feltes, and me. Let's start there. My law firm was the same way, very diverse staff. We need to recognize that systemic racism exists in New Hampshire. We need to call it out. We need to call out Chris Sununu for denying its existence. We need to call out Sununu for not challenging the president when he acts in a racist way. I've been the ACLU lawyer challenging profiling in Manchester. I've stood in courtrooms throughout the South defending death penalty defendants. I think we both have really strong credentials when it comes to social and racial injustice, and I'm very proud of mine.
Thank you both.
Jennifer,
Next question.
If I may.
Sure, Senator. Please take
Jennifer,
30 seconds. Yep.
Sure. I think, Andrew mentioned that he invoked our campaign. I would just say this. We've been very intentional at the beginning to involve a person of color at the table in our campaign. Our lead media person is a person of color. Our lead digital person is a person of color. And we have majority women staff. So what Andrew said just now was factually incorrect. But look, we are working to include more people in our democracy and economy. And that's what this is all about, lifting people up, not tearing people down.
Okay, let's move on. Here's John with the next question.
Thank you. New Hampshire's new chokehold law bans that maneuver except in certain circumstances where an officer believes someone's life is in imminent danger. Some people in New Hampshire believe this still leaves too much of a loophole. So, Councilor Walensky, should Senator Feltes have taken a stronger stance on this when the bill was being drafted and debated in the Senate?
Well, I don't think Dan should have taken credit for accomplishing much. So we banned chokeholds, but then we kept all of the exceptions in place that allow that kind of maneuver to be used. So in effect, nothing changed. But look, that's only one piece of the puzzle. We need to work to demilitarize our police. We need to diversify our police departments. We need to move resources from law enforcement to mental health and social work so that police officers can do their jobs and mental health professionals can do their jobs. We need to commit resources to opioid treatment and to homelessness, again, so police officers can focus on their jobs and we can provide resources to people who need them so we don't have jails and prisons being mental health treatment facilities, which is what they too often are.
Senator.
Thank you. Well, we have made progress working together. And serving as Majority Leader of the State Senate and serving in the State Senate for 3 terms, we made progress on a whole bunch of issues in criminal justice reform and police reform. And part of doing that is working together, not shouting from the sidelines, actually working with people. And we need to continue to make more reform. And the best ideas come from the ground up, not the top down. We've got to continue to listen to one another. This is not just a moment. We need to make it a movement for change. And whether caught on tape or not, whether subtle or overt, every day, Black Americans face words, actions, and conduct and policies that rob them of the American dream, if not their very lives. And we need to move forward on health care, mental health care across the continuum of care. We need to move forward on housing and protect people's homes. And I hope we get to chat a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Senator. Here's Monica with the next question.
Now, you've both promised Black Lives Matter organizers that you will take action to reduce disproportionate racial incarceration. New Hampshire's lone death row inmate is Black. Michael Addison killed Manchester police officer Michael Briggs in 2006 and was convicted and sentenced to death. White convicted killers of police officers in New Hampshire prior to Addison did not face capital murder charges. Was the state's decision to pursue the death penalty against Addison racist? Senator Feltes, we'll start with you.
Well, this is a series of litigation, and I think what resulted is what resulted. And what we did in the state Senate is repeal the death penalty over the veto of Governor Chris Sununu by one vote. Working for change. We did that in the state Senate, working together. And that's what this is all about. In fact, so much of this campaign and this primary is about working together, showing that we've gotten real results. In the state Senate, that's what I've done. We've been in the trenches, getting real results, and we are putting forth plans about what we're going to do moving forward. Not letters to the editor, but actual plans. And the voters deserve that from elected officials, and they deserve it from people campaigning for office.
Councilor Volinsky?
I've worked against the death penalty for almost 40 years. When I was 30 years old, I stood in front of the U.S. Supreme Court and argued a death penalty case and won. This January, I left my campaign for a week to go work on a death penalty case that I had for 30 years in Georgia. 5 hours before his scheduled execution, we won a commutation for my client in Georgia. I think that Addison and a white guy named Brooks were charged with capital murder at almost the same time. Brooks hired someone, planned, intentionally killed his victim. The jury in Addison's case found that he acted recklessly in killing Officer Briggs. There is a racist component to the death penalty, and it comes out in each and every case.
Councilor, would you commute Addison's death sentence as governor?
I think there is a process in place with the executive council and the governor. If the council voted to commute Addison's sentence, I would approve that.
Senator, as governor, would you?
I agree with Andrew and that process. Look, you put it before the council. We repealed the death penalty. If the council voted to do that, we would move forward with that.
Thank you. Let's get back to John with the next question now.
Thank you. Let's turn to taxes. Senator Feltus, you have said, of course, that you do not support a broad-based income or sales tax. Councilor Volinsky, you've, of course, not made that pledge prominently, and you said you might be open to such a tax, either one or both, or we're not sure. So let's direct this question to you. What specifically, now that's a week before the primary, will you propose to relieve the property tax burden on those who need it the most?
So the premise of your question is that we can live with the property tax. We can't. It's got a crushing burden. It's immoral. It forces seniors to ration their medication so that they can pay their taxes to stay in their homes. It keeps us from building affordable housing that young people and working people need. It hurts us in developing small businesses that also create jobs, because in broad swaths of our state, we cannot open businesses because of the tax burden. The property tax is New Hampshire's broadest based tax. It's unfair and it's immoral. So I would say this. About a week ago, experts before the School Funding Commission said two things. One, we spend about the right amount of money, $3.2 billion, and two, we can solve the school funding problem constitutionally without an income or sales tax, relying on a fair statewide property tax.
And, Senator Feltus, you've said you would close tax loopholes to try to relieve the property tax burden. Can you go into detail about that? Which ones you would close and how much that would raise to relieve property taxes?
Sure. Thank you, John. In New Hampshire, roughly 50% of businesses and corporations that are based in New Hampshire or sell into New Hampshire a product or service pay even a cent in our corporate tax code. In the last budget, securing over $200 million in new support for our communities, including securing $140 million in new public school education funding, the biggest public school education budget in state history, finally doing full-day kindergarten, the biggest increase in 20 years. We closed loopholes for corporations in the system, including corporations like Netflix, who clearly had a business relationship with the state of New Hampshire, selling a product or service into the state of New Hampshire. There are a lot more of those loopholes to close. And I don't support a broad-based income tax. Last night at a forum, Andrew said he would sign a budget with a broad-based income tax in it. And I disagree with Andrew. I don't think we spend the right amount on schools. I think the state should step up and spend more on our schools.
I think the question was, how much in the loopholes would you develop?
I think well, Andrew, a lot more than you're shuffling around property taxes.
Actually, it deals with the problem as the experts indicated last week. So how much will you develop for the budget for schools with closing your loopholes, and why haven't you closed them till now?
We did close them. We dedicated over $200 million. Hey, by the way, it's one thing to litigate an ed funding case. It's another thing to deliver ed funding. That's what we did. We developed the most progressive budget in state history, and we got to build off of it. Andrew, your idea is to raise property taxes in some communities and then redistribute it. It sounds like that's your idea. I think the state should step up and support public school education. You know, this is about Iris and Josie's future. It's about all our kids' future. They deserve a foundation for success and opportunity that's as strong as the granite under our soil. We're going to build off that progressive budget that Democrats did and move forward.
Well, I'll just say that most progressive budget leaves us 50th in the nation in state support for public education. It was an improvement, but it's mostly one-time money, and it came after multiple years of cuts. So really, you were giving back money that the school districts should have gotten in prior years while you were in the Senate, Dan.
That's not true, Andrew. And I know you've never worked on a state budget, but
well,
this is the biggest public school budget in state history, the biggest increase in 20 years. And you know what? For Andrew to say, look, we're 50th after this budget, and then say we spend the right amount on schools, doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. And we hear a lot from Andrew about the pledge this, the pledge that. We don't hear any plans. And let's be clear, talking about the pledge without talking about your plans is just politics as usual.
Well, the pledge is politics as usual. I'm happy to explain the problem with school funding, but let's allow the next question. And I apologize for interrupting so much.
Gentlemen, thank you. We will move on to the next question. Here's Monica.
Now, before the COVID-19 pandemic, New Hampshire had another huge health crisis to deal with: drug addiction and overdose deaths. New numbers show that ODs in Manchester in July were the highest they've been since June of 2019. How would you have prevented that spike? Councillor Walensky.
Well, I happened to be with Sununu at a council meeting when he told us that he dreamt up, that's his words, the hub and spoke system for treating opioid addiction. As I was sitting there, I knew that Vermont had the same system 5 years earlier. So I went to Vermont and I asked, how does the system work and where are the shortcomings? And they told me the hubs are relatively easy to set up, but it's the spokes, the providers in the communities that are often missing because, in part, we don't pay them well enough. New Hampshire has some of the lowest Medicaid reimbursement rates in the nation. We don't support our community health centers as we should. What we do is we downshift to the local property taxpayer, and we ask places like Manchester and Nashua to fund safe stations programs.
Senator Feltes, how would you have prevented the spike?
Well, as a legal aid lawyer, I helped people get access to health care and treatment. In the state Senate, I've broken down barriers to health insurance coverage for treatment, including working with then State Senator Nancy Stiles to take on the health insurance industry to get rid of prior authorizations for intensive inpatient drug treatment. And recently, we put forward initiatives to advance treatment and addiction treatment services. And Sununu vetoed a bill that we passed 24-0, bipartisan support, to enhance addiction treatment services. Fundamentally, what's going on here is that we have something called the Doorways program, and despite the best efforts of people on the ground, it's largely a doorway to nowhere. There's no back room. There's no treatment capacity. We need to build up treatment capacity across the continuum of care, and it needs to be on a statewide basis, not just in the I-93 corridor. Families all around the state should have access. This is not just a moral issue, it's a cost savings issue, and Sununu unilaterally cut addiction treatment services recently out of the budget.
Senator, thank you. Let's get back to John now with the next question.
Thank you. For Senator Feltes first. Mental health and substance abuse are often intertwined, but this next question is about people who are in a mental health crisis. While the state has done work to reduce the number of people housed in emergency rooms while in a crisis, it is still happening, with the state recently seeing an uptick in the number of cases. How can this be prevented? Senator, what could you do on your first day to stop this from happening?
Well, thank you, John. And there are people waiting in emergency rooms for needed, timely, and necessary mental health treatment. You don't wait if you break your leg. People are waiting for mental health treatment, including kids. 23 kids last week waiting in our emergency rooms who needed and timely mental health treatment. And John, we actually put measures into the budget and funded them to deal with this. Community mental health services, including a statewide mobile crisis intervention and stabilization team for children in distress needing mental health treatment. And Sununu has failed to stand it up. Literally, failed to stand it up. And that could have prevented those 23 kids from waiting in emergency rooms. So on day one, we're going to stand up the services we funded in the budget. And when I talk about the budget, and I talk about people not having experiences on the budget, including Andrew, this is what's at stake. We need this budget to work for ordinary people and to deal with the behavioral health crisis and to deal with people left out and left behind. That's what I'll do on day one.
Counselor?
Thank you. So I work as hard as I can to talk to people who really understand these issues. Dan's right about the Mobile Crisis Center. I was talking to community mental health center leaders the other day, and that was one of the things they pointed out as missing. But that's only part of the problem. We have about 70 people in ER boarding right now. Here's what the state's done. They said it's the community hospital's responsibility that the people are there. That's what they did in their federal litigation. That was misleading and wrong. What we need to do is stand up right away community halfway transition facilities so that we can discharge people who are being held at the hospital who shouldn't be. We can do that at the Sununu Center. We could do that at the Doobie facility in Laconia. We can do it at the Philbrook Center. There are places we can use for that purpose. We should do it now and get those people out of the emergency rooms.
Counselor, thank you. Let's get back to Monica for the next question.
Now, during COVID-19, New Hampshire has seen a noticeable rise in background checks for new firearm purchases. Now, both of you tonight have backed new firearms laws, including restrictions on guns on school property, waiting periods for firearm purchases, and red flag laws. The question now is, how far are you willing to go with those new laws? Tell us if you would ban AR-15 type rifles and require mandatory licensing and training in order to own a firearm in our state. Counselor?
So I start here. My son Josh is a middle school science teacher. My daughter Molly just finished 5 years as a high school social worker in an urban high school in New York City. If you're asking, would I do everything in my power to keep guns out of schools and protect the children there and the personnel who work there? You bet I would. Look, Dan and I both have Moms Demand Action Candidate of Distinction recognitions because we support common sense gun safety laws. I think we both think that those laws are important to keep people safe in New Hampshire. We know that many suicides, most suicides, take place with a firearm. If a person didn't have a firearm, there could have been time for interventions. I would have stepped up and signed every one of those bills that the legislature passed.
And Counselor, to be clear, would you ban AR-15 type rifles, and would you require a license and mandatory training in order to own a firearm in the state?
I would do everything I could to prevent AR-15s from getting into individuals' hands, but it's largely a federal issue because you have interstate commerce clause issues. In order to drive in New Hampshire, you have to take a test to earn your license. I don't see why gun ownership is any different.
Senator Feltes?
Well, thank you. It's not a federal issue. I don't think weapons of war should be on the streets of New Hampshire. But I don't support mandatory licensing or mandatory training. And I do support common sense gun violence prevention, including the kinds of measures that we passed in the legislature for the first time in New Hampshire history. Working as majority leader of the state Senate, we've delivered results. We landed those bills on Governor Sununu's desk. He vetoed all 4 of them: universal background checks, gun-free school zones, a waiting period, and extreme risk protection order. Things that we know prevent suicide from gun violence in other states, and Sununu vetoed them. In the last election, Sununu said he supported universal background checks. Literally. Told the voters that. And then he vetoed the bill when we sent it to his desk. And by the way, this should not be a partisan issue because it's not a partisan issue in the general public. Sununu's on the wrong side of the general public. Vast, overwhelming majority of Republicans, Democrats, and independents support common sense gun violence protections, including universal background checks.
Senator, thank you. Monica, back to you.
Now, depending on how the national elections go on November 3rd, the health insurance industry could look drastically different. Regardless of what happens nationally, what could you do as governor to make sure that Granite Staters get proper health care? Senator?
Thank you. And as I mentioned, as a legal aid lawyer for about a decade, not taking a job as a corporate attorney, but fighting for ordinary folks, I expanded access to health care, worked with people to get them access to health insurance. In the state Senate, I was the lead Democratic negotiator on Medicaid expansion reauthorization, securing health care for 50,000 Granite Staters. And I led the way on prescription drug relief this year, including importing safe, low-cost drugs from Canada. In addition to that, the most progressive price cap on insulin in the nation, $30 out of pocket. We got that done. We delivered results for ordinary people, but there's a whole bunch more we can do, and we know that uninsured rates are going up right now under COVID-19, under Chris Sununu. And we know Chris Sununu vetoed our bill to make sure that folks who need testing and treatment under COVID-19 don't have to pay out of pocket. And he vetoed paid family and medical leave insurance. These are key issues for our healthcare access, and reducing costs for families and businesses.
Councilor Walensky?
Well, before I took office, I served for 6 years on the board of directors of the Manchester Community Health Center. I understand what it means to provide health care, primary care, preventative care to people in poverty. I served with New Americans on that board. I learned a great deal. I think we need to build out and build up our backbone of federally qualified health centers across the state. It's still amazing to me that there are parts of the state without obstetric care. How can we expect our state to thrive if there are parts of the state where you can't have a baby? So I would do that. In COVID-19, we know the problems of tying employment and health insurance together, and we need to break that tie. It's more of a federal issue, but I'm a Medicare for All guy. I think there are some things we can do to start to approach that on the state level using the municipal risk pools, and I would undertake that. I think Dan's right on family medical leave, particularly during the pandemic, and I would work to advance the interests of family planning centers across the state, Planned Parenthood, Equality Health Center, Joan G. Lovering.
Councilor, thank you. And finally, this last question before the candidates will make their closing statements. We're living in a time when people are anxious. They're worried about their health, their children, their jobs, the political climate, and a whole lot more. So how are you the person who will help lead Granite Staters through these times? We begin with Senator Feltes on that.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. You ought to be able to trust that someone's going to be in your corner. Working people and working families ought to have someone in their corner in the corner office. That's who I fought for my entire career. When I was fighting for that coverage for folks with diabetes, to make sure the price cap is only $30 out of pocket. When I was fighting as a legal aid lawyer for access to health care. Andrew was representing Craig Benson and Craig Benson's corporation dismissing someone with diabetes. When I was fighting to protect homeowners, including Carl and Pauline, who got the home of their dreams, a modest home, and then fell behind during the Great Recession with job loss. When I was representing them and helping them save their home against a Wall Street bank, Andrew was on the other side in the Great Recession, representing a title company that was alleged to defraud people out of their homes. So fundamentally, this is about who you trust. I've always been on the side of working people and working families, and we need to get out of this mess in a way that works for them,
Senator,
not
thank you.
corporate special
Senator,
interests.
thank you. Councilor Walensky, your response to the final question?
Yeah, I think we need to rely on people who will tell the truth no matter whether it's helpful or painful for them. Those comments about the title insurance company, the title insurance company was disciplined by the Department of Insurance for giving discounts to fellow business members of the Portsmouth Country Club. It had nothing to do with mortgages. That's just a bald-faced misstatement. Look, you need people who you can trust, who show good judgment. On Granite Bridge, I opposed the Granite Bridge fracked gas pipeline, and I stayed opposed to it. I haven't switched sides on that issue back and forth, back and forth. On campaign finance, I said I wouldn't take PAC money and I wouldn't take LLC money, and I've never had to return money because I didn't live up to my own standards as Dan has. It's judgment, it's honesty, it's candor.
Counselor?
That's who you trust.
Counselor, thank you. Counselor, thank you. We've also given each candidate 60 seconds now for their closing statements. And Senator, please go first.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and to Andrew and WMER and St. Ace. Appreciate the opportunity. And to all the viewers at home, I respectfully ask for your vote in this race. We need to get out of this mess in a way that works for working people and working families, not corporate special interests, not folks at the top. And even Chris Sununu vetoing all of these bills that help working people and working families. No school reopening plan, no public health standards, not looking out for health insurance, including vetoing insurance coverage for women's reproductive health care. Says he's pro-choice, but every action in between election times is anything but. Now, we are endorsed in this race by so many, including End Citizens United, because we've led on campaign finance reform. No corporate PAC money, no corporate money, even fossil fuel money, none. We are endorsed by End Citizens United, only candidate to release their tax returns, and we are working hard to lift people up, not tear people down.
Thank you, Senator. Councilor Volinsky.
This debate is really about who stands up better against Sununu and Trump in the fall. Dan had some good policy initiatives, but Sununu completely thwarted them with all of his vetoes. By contrast, I've sat across the table from Chris Sununu week in and week out as an executive counselor. When he was right, I cooperated. When he was wrong, I was the persistent resistance to every wrong act he tried to take. I knew more than he did. I studied the issues harder than he did. I brought forward the arguments that at times brought my Republican colleagues along with me. That's how we stopped Gordon McDonald. That's how we stopped an unqualified environmental commissioner. That's how we forced Sununu to release all of those sweetheart contracts. I ask for your support. I ask for your vote. Go to VolinskyNH.com. Thank you for listening tonight.
Okay, and with that, we thank both candidates for their time tonight and also the panelists for being part of this debate. And we thank you for joining us for the first of our Granite State debates. Tomorrow, we'll hear from the Republican candidates running for their party's U.S. Senate nomination. And if you missed any part of tonight's debate, you'll be able to find it right on our website and app. Have a good night.